Okay, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be speaking, as Toby said, about SuccessFactors replication monitoring and how to remove the thorn from your side. So when most people think about integration between their SAP HR system and SuccessFactors Employee Central, the first thoughts that usually come to mind are things like, how hard can it be? They're both SAP systems, right? That means integration will be seamless. It'll work with the click of a button. It's basically plug and play and should look after itself, right? Well, when you start to implement this seamless integration, you realize that there are a lot more moving parts than you thought. Firstly, we need some sort of middleware, and SAP gives you the SAP Integration Suite, which was previously called SAP Cloud Platform Integration. They also give you SAP Cloud Connector, which acts as a reverse proxy for security reasons. As you start to grapple with the technical complications of how the integration flows, reality strikes, and it strikes hard. Your SAP HR system will trigger a replication request by sending a web service call to Integration Suite. Integration Suite forwards that request onto Employee Central, which in turn responds with the relevant requested data. Integration Suite passes the data back to the Cloud Connector, which in turn passes on to the SAP HR system. The SAP HR system then triggers a confirmation message to Integration Suite, which forwards that confirmation onto Employee Central to close the loop. Along the way, all sorts of logs are being recorded in multiple systems, and it's important that you keep an eye on these in case something goes wrong. The thing is, this all happens over and over again. Some companies set it to run a few times a day, and others every 15 minutes. You can imagine the amount of log records that need to be monitored in this process. Before we look at the different types of logs in a bit more detail, I thought I'd give you an idea of what controls the replication process. Everything is triggered by the SAP HR system through a whole lot of scheduled batch jobs. We start with a job that tries to reprocess past org object replication errors. Next, we run the org object replication query, which basically asks SuccessFactors to send any new changes since the last time it ran. Then a job runs to process the org objects that were received in the previous step. We move on to a job that asks SuccessFactors to send the information about any changes to employees since the last run. The final job processes the org assignment portion for the employees that were successfully replicated in the previous step. Now, all of these jobs are scheduled to repeat multiple times a day. As I mentioned earlier, some companies run it maybe twice a day, while others run it every 15 minutes. Then, usually as the last thing to do at night, we run some cleanup jobs. Firstly, we give it a final go at processing any org objects that somehow got missed throughout the day. We do the same for employee data just to make sure to pick up any loose ends. We then have two jobs that clear out the staging areas for org objects and for employee org assignment data. If you wanted replication to run every hour during working hours, it would mean that more than 50 jobs would run each day. Okay, so I know this is all pretty technical and probably quite boring, but the whole reason this topic is relevant is because if replication doesn't work as expected, then your HR data is going to be wrong on your payroll system. Probably not the best idea. It reminds me of a company in the US that had over 58,000 employees. Their HR systems were in such a mess that more than 10,000 of their staff were getting incorrect payslips each month. And that is clearly not the thing that you want to happen in your organization. I'm not sure what's going on now. There we go. All right, so now that we know that replication is not as simple and seamless as we thought, the question is, what do we do about it? Well, it might seem complicated, but the beauty of replication is that it creates a lot of logs. So if something does go wrong, then we can find out why and fix it. The trick, of course, is knowing where to look. Not only that, but knowing how often to look and also knowing what kind of person needs to look at the logs. So let me tell you about the different types of logs that need to be monitored. As a high-level overview, there are logs within the SAP system itself. We'll go through these so that you can get an idea of what needs to be considered. We'll then look at the logs on SuccessFactors, and finally, we'll have a look at the logs within the SAP Integration Suite. The system application logs are the most detailed and useful logs throughout the whole process. This is where you'll find almost all the information you need to troubleshoot replication problems. If you find an error here, it means replication has failed for that employee or org object, usually because of some sort of data problem in SuccessFactors or a temporary problem like a locked payroll area or something. So who should be looking at these logs? An HR system analyst or someone similar to that is usually familiar with, or that is familiar with transaction PA30 would quickly understand the messages here because they are the same ones seen in PA30. It is, however, a very technical log, and I wouldn't recommend asking your master data team to look at this transaction. There is a better view for them coming up just now. How often should you be checking these logs? Ideally, regularly throughout the day, just after the replication jobs run each time. It also depends on your business requirements, though. Usually, at minimum, I would suggest checking no less than 3 times a day. The Web Service Message Monitor log is a place to dig deeper when troubleshooting replication errors that are not so obvious. So you might get a confusing error message in the application logs, but here you might find more clues to understand the root cause. If you do find an error in these logs, it means replication has failed and an investigation needs to be done to figure out what caused the problem and what needs to be done to prevent it from continuing. Who should look at these logs? This one depends. If you're using the logs to troubleshoot a problem, then it's a technical integration consultant who's got the experience in replication. But the SAP Basis team could probably be the ones to glance over it. And if they find anything that they don't understand, then they can pass it on to the integration consultant. How often do we need to look at this? Again, while it's ideal to check as often as your replication jobs run, that's not too practical, and daily would probably be enough. You might want to up that frequency during your high processing periods, like during payroll preparation or big data take-ons or things like that. And here is another technical area, the Web Service Utility Error Log. It picks up things like network problems, locked integration users, SSL certificate issues, etc. So usually if there's an error here, then replication has failed and won't show up in the other logs at all. Now, often people forget to look at this log. They don't see any errors in the other logs, and therefore they think that things are hunky-dory. In the meantime, the system is broken and nothing is replicating. So who should look at these logs? Usually the SAP Basis team. How often? Same as the previous ones. While it's ideal to check as often as your replication jobs run, it's not always practical, and daily should be all right. While there are usually not a lot of short dumps that occur during replication, if it does happen, it happens quietly, and no one notices that something didn't replicate. That's, of course, a problem. Usually your SAP Basis team is already monitoring this daily, but I would suggest that you get them to specifically report on short dumps related to replication. And yeah, daily should be enough. And now we move out of the SAP system and into the integration suite. This is another technical log that only an experienced integration consultant would be able to navigate and analyze. If things fail here, then the problem won't appear in the SAP logs, but replication probably didn't work. In the other logs within SAP, it might show, and in SuccessFactors as well, it might show the replication job as in process, but it just stays in that status forever if nothing is done about it. So who should be looking at this? The SAP Basis team could check to see if there are any errors and then pass it on to the integration consultant if something is found. How often? Again, as often as possible. You would like to continually monitoring this for problems, but practically that's not always possible. So maybe once or twice a day, that would probably do. And now, leaving the best for last, we move on to the SuccessFactors Data Replication Monitor. This is basically a much nicer and easier to understand view of the first log that we looked at, the system application log in SAP. What's really nice about this log is that you can see all unresolved employee replication errors. Once an error is fixed, then the log is updated accordingly. So at a quick glance, you can see how many employees have not yet been fixed. It also shows you the high-level error messages so that you can go and fix the problems to re-replicate. You can click on the error message to see more of a description, or you can click on the employee's name or the employee's name to go to the actual employee in SuccessFactors. The problem here is that it does not include logs for org objects like divisions, departments, jobs, and positions. For those, you'll have to stick with the more technical logs in SAP. So who should look at, let me go back. So who should be looking at these logs? I would suggest that your master data team and HR system analysts get access to these logs. It's simple enough to run and understand, and will empower them to pick up errors and fix them proactively. They often refer to these regularly if they're making a change in SuccessFactors, expecting a change in the SAP system, and so they can quickly just look here to see, has it gone through yet? How often? Again, it's more of a continual thing, but I would recommend no less than 3 times a day. All right, so I've gone through all of the logs that are available, and here is a summary of them with transaction codes for the SAP logs. A question often asked is, can't the system just email me if something goes wrong rather than me monitoring all day? Well, the long and the short of it is, unfortunately not. Which is why we created the K5 Replication Monitoring tool, which does send emails. We automatically pull logs from all of the different systems into one place, analyze them, and report only on what matters. Using artificial intelligence, K5's Replication Monitor works out which problems have already been resolved and which still need attention. It sends a daily health report, as well as ad hoc alert notifications whenever something goes wrong throughout the day. Different people can be included as recipients based on what the monitor finds. It caters for employee data and for org objects like divisions, departments, jobs, and positions. In fact, it can also monitor custom iFlows if you have them. The point of the K5 Replication Monitor tool is to take away the pain of monitoring. No one has to log in regularly throughout the day to make sure things are running smoothly. Our tool will keep an eye on things and let you know if anything does go wrong, whether it's data issues in SuccessFactors or technical connectivity problems. We also like to present things in a graphical way with charts where possible, and we like to give it a human touch to make everything less boring. This is an example of an ad hoc alert notification email. This is the kind of email that is sent as and when a problem occurs. If nothing goes wrong, then no emails are sent out. This, of course, is just the header of the email, and I'm going to take you through the different sections of the email now. Here we give a high-level traffic light overview of new problems detected. Each alert type has a tile and is linked to a team or person's name, which is configurable. Technical errors are things like broken network connectivity, integration user authentication issues, or SSL certificate problems. They're usually seen to by the SAP basis or IT infrastructure team. Temporary errors occur when replication is prevented by some sort of temporary condition that will resolve itself over time. Typical examples are when the payroll control record is locked, preventing master data changes, or if a user is locking the employee in PA30 or the org object is locked in PP01, then replication can't make the required change until the user unlocks the object. The reason this tile is yellow is because it's more for information purposes, as it almost always resolves itself with a bit of time. The way these work is that each time replication runs, it tries to reprocess the temporary error records until they finally get resolved. Failure alerts indicate when replication has failed and will not fix itself. It means further investigation is needed. It's usually data problems like a change made too far into the past or some other validation that should have failed in PA30, but where SuccessFactors didn't have a validation to stop the user from making the mistake. Sometimes there can be cases where in the replication logs it gives a warning message instead of an error. This means replication did work, but the warning might indicate something that is business critical for you. We can flag these items so that they're tracked even though they aren't really hard stop errors. An example here is that you might have integration turned on between your standalone SAP payroll system and the SAP finance system. The cost center validation check might fail because of a network problem. This would cause a warning, but it would still replicate. Some clients would prefer for this to be highlighted and resolved when it happens to avoid payroll postings to the incorrect cost centers, or worse, to avoid having the payroll fall over because of an invalid cost center value. We set the system up so that emails are sent based on the types of alerts. For example, when there are technical errors, then we might include the SAP Basis team in the email. Or if there are replication failures or custom alerts, then we might include the HR master data team. If there are any unresolved problems from previous reports, then we include these in the email as a constant reminder that there's work to be done. We are quite relentless when it comes to making sure that problems are seen to, so if it's not fixed, it stays on the reports. We found that if there are any items older than 5 days, it's a good sign someone isn't paying attention. There are certain things like org objects and employee org assignment data that get put into what we call staging tables when they're replicated. This means the changes haven't been committed to the actual database yet, but still need to be processed. And sometimes things can get stuck here for various reasons. So we include a graph to give a visual representation if this does happen. While all our graphs look nice, we obviously need to give specific details so that you can see what needs to be fixed. Here, we show more details about new problems found since the last report was sent. If a technical error was found in the integration suite, then we include a link that takes you directly to the logs in Integration Suite to see the detailed information. And finally, if there are older unresolved items, then we give those details too. Again, we keep these details on every email we send out until the problems are resolved. This avoids people forgetting about problems or thinking that they've somehow resolved themselves. And that's the end of our ad hoc alert notification email example. Now, let's have a look at what the daily health report looks like. This email is sent out every morning. It tells you what the status of your replication system is currently and gives an overview of what happened the day before. We've tried to keep it simple enough not to be overwhelmingly boring, while still include the most important information. You'll see that we do repeat some information from the ad hoc alert notification emails. The emails are, however, configurable, and you can choose which sections you want to include or exclude. Again, we show a graph of the number of unresolved problems and how old they are. In this example, we have 2 temporary errors that occurred the previous day and 1 failure that's older than 5 days. I wouldn't worry too much about the 2 temporary errors. It may have been a locked payroll control record that will only be released in a day or 2, and we'd see that information lower on in the email. The older failure is a concern though, and I would want to find out why no one has done anything to fix it yet. As in the ad hoc email, we show you when there are any unprocessed staging records. If a staging record fails, as in this example, it means the employee master data portion successfully replicated, but the org assignment portion, which is info type 1, has failed. So things like your cost center, the org unit, position, job, and org key would not have updated correctly, which is obviously a problem. For information purposes, we give you the traffic light view of what happened the previous day. So basically, it's an aggregate view of all of the previous day's alerts summed up together. There's nothing you have to do about these. It's more just to give you a visual view of how things went yesterday at a glance. And this is one of my personal favorites. We show you how many objects have been replicated over time. So it's a nice view to pick up trends about how actively HR is being maintained and how many errors you're getting along the way. So here in this graph, you can see that every weekend it goes pretty quiet, and there was also a public holiday in the middle of the month. We again list the details of any unresolved replication failures to make and the temporary errors to make sure that they never get forgotten. Once the data has been corrected in SuccessFactors, then the items here will automatically be marked as resolved and removed from the list. Finally, we give a view of any items that were corrected the previous day, again, just for information purposes and to see if your teams are actually. We can also integrate with your help desk system so that a new ticket is logged whenever there is a replication failure, a technical error, or a custom alert. This can be especially helpful when you have more complex support models in place, such as global service centers or shared service environments. If you're wondering about the cat video in the background, I just really liked it and I didn't know where else to put it. And to finish off, I'd like to suggest some tips to reduce the number of replication errors you get. The first one is low-hanging fruit. There's functionality in Employee Central where you can set up your pay dates and have the system give warnings or errors when users try to make changes too far into the past. For example, someone tries to change bank details backdated to before the last payroll run. Without this feature, you can expect a lot of retro errors when you replicate. Next is business rule validations. It's way better to catch problems while a user is inputting data rather than allowing invalid entries only to have replication fall over later. Business rules can be complicated at times though, and they have their limitations. They're certainly not as powerful as user exits in SAP HR used to be. Because of the limitations, it is a fine balance in deciding how many business rules to implement for validations, but focus on the high-touch areas and you'll save a lot of trouble when it comes to replication. Process training for your users is really important. You need to help them understand that what couldn't be done in PA30 shouldn't be done in SuccessFactors. When I talk about your users, I'm talking about your master data teams or your payroll teams. Employee Central was never intended to be a like-for-like replacement of SAP HR. There are many things Employee Central will let you do that SAP HR will not. Clearly written standard operating procedures go a long way to help users capture things the right way. An example for this might be something like instructions on exactly how to capture an extension of a fixed-term contract. If you don't have the instructions, people can do it differently or do it incorrectly that causes replication issues. Another important thing to let relevant users know is what times of the day replication runs so that they know when they can expect data to arrive in the payroll system. Otherwise, they'll be knocking on your door regularly asking you, when is it going to be there? Why is the system broken? In Employee Central, you can capture multiple events in the same day. For example, you can hire someone and then do a data change on that same day. In SAP HR, you have to turn on the additional actions functionality for this to work. If you haven't already turned this on, then you'll definitely need to prevent a lot of replication problems. I always advise clients to only replicate what they have to and nothing more. If you're replicating purely for payroll purposes, then don't replicate emergency contacts or dependent information or any other information that is not required for payroll to run. A minimalist approach reduces the number of logs and potential problems and is also more compliant with your POPI Act. And finally, I'd just say definitely stay on top of any problems that pop up. Don't bury your head in the sand and let your monitoring slip. Lack of attention on replication errors can very quickly lead to dual capture in SuccessFactors and SAP HR simply to get your payrolls through. And this is not a good situation to be in and not fun to try and fix later. Well, that's it from me. I know this is quite a technical topic and it can get rather dry. There's so much more I could have delved into, but I've tried to convey the most useful information that I could in our short time together without making you want to jump off of a building. So hopefully I've succeeded. If anyone has any questions, then now's your time.
Thanks, David. I see that there are a couple of questions posted. How is the data replication monitor accessed in SuccessFactors? That's from Kamugelo.
Okay, so if you're talking about the SAP the standard SuccessFactors replication monitor, if you type in the action search area, you can just type in the word replication. If you've got permissions to it, it'll come up with the title of data replication monitor. If you don't see it means you haven't got permissions to see it. You just need to chat to security then to get those permissions.
Thanks, David. And then there's a follow-up question by Kamugelo. Is it possible to export the application log in ERP to Excel where one can filter and analyze the errors, especially when reviewing the log over a longer period?
Yeah, so that's a common request, and it is possible to do it, and it's a nightmare. I've done a lot of that in my time, especially on migration projects and new implementations. You can go to transaction SLGD instead of SLG1. It's all the same filters there. You can then run it in list view and then export that list into a CSV format. And then you'll have to work in Excel. The problem is it's not all aligned, so it's not nice columns and that sort of stuff. So it's a real headache to work with, but it is technically possible.
Thanks, David. And then the last one, Luan says, awesome product, addresses a huge gap in the standard replication process. And I tend to agree with that.
Great. Thanks, Luan. Thanks for that comment.
Okay. David, thank you so much. We've run out of time. If there are any further questions that you would like to address to David or Deborah, they would be in their booth for most of the time. So please feel free to pop in to the K5 booth, have a chat, have a virtual coffee, see what's going on, see what else they've got going at the moment. You're seeing David's contact details on screen now. So please make sure that you pop around to their booth to have a chat to them.